George Washington was the first President of the United States. He was formally inducted into office on April 30th, 1789, and set the precedent for how the presidential office was held throughout further terms. Throughout his life and presidency, Washington accomplished many important tasks. He was a Revolutionary War hero, a trusted husband. Washington was a remarkable dancer. And beyond all, the man who created the formality of the President of the United States of America.
Washington sits at his desk in his familiar home in Mount Vernon. The date is April 16, 1789. The President has led troops through countless Revolutionary War battles, slain many men, but nothing could prepare him for what was about to come. He was preparing to travel to New York to deliver his inaugural address to the eager public and be inducted into the presidency of the United States of America. That morning, he wrote an entry in his journal describing his feelings for the day.
About 10 o'clock, I bade adieu to Mount Vernon, to private life, and to domestic felicity, and with a mind oppressed with more anxious and painful sensations than I have words to express, set out for New York in company with Mr. Thompson and Colonel Humphreys, with the best dispositions to render service to my country in obedience to its call, but with less hope of answering its expectations.
On April 30th, 1789, Washington was sworn into presidency by the Chancellor of New York, Robert Livingston. Washington became the first President of the United States after the ratification of the Constitution. The inaugural ceremony took place on the second balcony of the Federal Hall in New York City. At the time, this was the first United States Capitol and the site where the first United States Congress met.
Okay.
Washington wore an American made dark brown suit with white silk stockings and silver shoe buttons. He was quite well. Yours lifted
Good.
On this beautiful spring afternoon, the precedent for the presidential office of the United States of America was set.
Being the first president, Washington had to set the precedent for future leaders of the country.
On Tuesday afternoons, Washington would receive mail callers from 3 to 4 in the afternoon.
After Washington's father's death, his older brothers continued to instruct him to be a gentleman. He wrote diaries explaining some of his favorite amusements, like playing for stakes at popular card games or taking fencing lessons in Winchester, Virginia. Virginians loved to dance, and George paid for his own dancing lessons. He frequented the theater in both Fredericksburg and Williamsburg. In a society obsessed with horse racing, equine, bloodlines, and fox hunting, Washington was renowned as a superb horseman. In fact, his talent horseman skills could have taught him the balance needed to execute complicated dance moves later in life. In order to increase his formality and stature, Both in his presidency and before, George Washington constantly attended and hosted many balls. This famous painting shows General Washington at a ball celebrating the end of the American Revolution. Notice his tall, composed posture and how he appears to be commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Now, notice the girl he is dancing with. This is said to be Catherine Littlefield, otherwise known as Kitty. In the winter of 1777 to 1778, Marvin Kitman, a common attender of upper-class soirees, wrote a letter which describes how Kitty was one of Washington's favorite dancing partners. He states that at a Valley Forge soiree, the two danced for 3 hours without stopping. This same description of a long dancing style was not only accounted for once. James Tilton, a general during the American Revolution, states in a letter that the two danced for 3 hours without a break during a small dance gathering. In 18th and 19th century ballrooms, etiquette stood at utmost importance. The way one carried oneself in the ballroom portrayed their social class and position in society. The middle class attempted to act in a similar etiquette to the upper class, hoping that in return, their own position in society would be raised. Having etiquette experience provided harmony in the ballroom. They used printed manuals for reference on how to portray this popular etiquette in the ballroom and at social arrangements. One of the many choreographed aspects of the ballroom was asking a lady to dance. The gentleman must stand a respectable distance away from the lady, bow towards her, and request the honor of having her as a dancing partner. He should never be hasty or request the same woman more than 4 times in one evening. Balls were considered to be mandatory social events, and those who attended put out their best clothing and jewelry to show off their wealth. The things they wore directly affected their stature in society. George Washington's grandson, George Washington Parke Custis, was raised as his son and often witnessed him dancing at formal events while living in the presidential mansion in New York. He was spoiled, lazy, and known to many as a brat, but increased the family image that Washington was trying to acquire to increase his stature as president. This made him more relatable to the general public of the country he was ruling and a more admirable leader. The boy wrote a book entitled Recollections and Private Memoirs of General Washington, which provides a first-hand account of the formal celebrations during the birth night ball. one of Washington's favorite gatherings. Common attire for women was a very tight and uncomfortable corset, a large hoop underskirt, and many petticoats that fluffed out the decorative outer skirt that went over those many layers of clothing. The men would wear formal black slacks, white shirts with stiff collars, and a black jacket with long coat tails and a top hat. The men and women attending these balls were wearing their very best to try and impress someone or show off their wealth and power to others. Young Washington decided to channel these thoughts and wrote them down into what became his Rules of Civility. These rules explain decent behavior one should show in company and conversation. These rules showed how Washington behaved with such grace at all the formal gatherings he attended throughout his lifespan. Washington wrote these set of rules to define what he believed to be proper etiquette, and they ended up being used all throughout the country that he later ruled.
Good. Washington to host parties as a way to discuss federal issues. Washington agreed to host dinners, but only wanted people of distinction and rank to attend them. George Washington arranged to have a reception every Tuesday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon.
Often when George Washington had people over his house, they would read and study books about ancient civilizations, such as Greek and Rome, from Washington's 900-book home library. The leaders then worked together and used ideas to formulate their own opinions on how to improve the government based on older government styles. Washington and his men would learn from mistakes made in ancient civilizations and try to avoid repeating them. These conversations that occurred at Washington's home library were a crucial method of developing policies for the issues of the times. For example, in 1790, the famous dinner table bargain between Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison led to the establishment of the new capital of what is modern-day Washington, D.C. These dinner table conversations were where revolutionary ideas unfolded and led to our nation's success. Some major issues discussed at the dinner table bargain were locating a capital city, strengthening national government, the loss of states' control, and a grand compromise. There were 16 potential locations for the capital, from New York to the banks of the Potomac River. More suggestions were in the north, which made Madison feel like he had lost influence. Potomac's River was close to Washington's home at Mount Vernon, but the permanent capital would be placed somewhere more central. The issue of strengthening the national government sprung from Alexander Hamilton's interpretation of the Constitution and his own beliefs of a strong central authority. He was convinced that the Constitution gave him the implied power to pursue financial policies that increased the government's strength. As the first president, Washington not only had to establish the country and the presidency politically, but socially as well. Washington wanted to make the presidency extremely formal, where his presidential figure was far above that of a regular citizen. In order to preserve the formality of the presidency, Washington would never shake any regular citizen's hand. Washington would never walk anywhere in public and limited his public appearances. He spent many of his outdoor appearances on horseback as an attempt to make himself look heroic. Washington had scheduled days when he would appear in public, and the rest of the time he spent in his home, where he would discuss political matters with other people in high political positions. President Washington decided that he would only host dinners and would never attend anyone else's. He felt that it was below him and made him look inferior if he was to be the one traveling and not hosting.